Yo, what's up? Finally got my top 10 books of 2021 video going. Usually this is everyone's favorite, and I'm the same way. I really love ranking whatever type of art I'm consuming, whether it's movies or music or figuring out what I like best. I don't know, it's super satisfying for me. I'm gonna start off with a couple of nonfiction favorites and some honorable mentions before I start into the actual top 10 ranking. None of my top 10 books are like nonfiction except for one. I don't know, I felt like including it in it. Starting off with How to Read Literature Like a Professor. Anybody that wants to get into literature, I highly recommend this. It's funny, it's engaging. I have a video about this, so I'll link it above, but my biggest complaint was that he used too many of the same examples. Other than that, I really enjoyed it. Definitely recommend if you're wanting to get into literature. And then I also have Zen and the Art of Writing. If you're interested in writing or reading or literature or anything like that, I highly suggest that book as well, by Ray Bradbury. It's very good. It's short. It's a quick read. It's super inspirational. Or I kind of want to have it by me at all times, anytime I'm in like a reading or writing slump, to help me like inspire me. The next nonfiction favorite was Sapiens by Harari. Super interesting history of us as a species. It really summarizes a lot of history and culture and tied a lot of points together. Because I mean, when you're learning these little dots of history, and it just kind of like connects everything. So, and then probably my two favorite nonfiction reads of last year were How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. Anybody that's interested in the actual science of psychedelics and MDMA and psilocybin and LSD and how those benefit us, how we're going to be using that in the future to help with PTSD and other mental illnesses, and just to like learn the history of it. Super interesting, very good for like a beginner that wants to get into the psychedelic world or is just curious and don't know anything about it. It's written for people that haven't really experimented with it, and so it's a lot of beginner knowledge. Also a lot of things to learn for someone that's experienced. So another LSD psychedelic nonfiction book that I really liked was Doors of Perception and Heaven and Hell, my most popular video on this channel, which I'm really glad to see out of any of the books that I've read and put up. I'm really proud of that one, and I'm glad people are drawn to it. It's about Aldous Huxley trying psychedelics for the first time. Doors of Perception is his actual experience of it, what he felt, what he went through, and then Heaven and Hell is him afterwards intellectualizing it and connecting it with culture and kind of everything. Highly suggest all of those. Very good stuff. I usually have a nonfiction book in rotation. I usually read 4 books at a time. One's usually a philosophy book, one's a nonfiction book, and I usually have 2 literature books going. And on to the honorable mentions. They're technically short stories, so that's why I didn't include them in the top 10, but I felt like they should still be mentioned because I'm not a big short story person, but when it comes to 2 of my favorite authors, I felt obligated to read them and they sounded really interesting. First being from this big collection of Dostoevsky works. There's a bunch of them. Probably can't really see that. I have The Dream of a Ridiculous Man, which is pretty psychedelic, spiritual little work. It's probably only 20 pages in this, but small print and a lot compacted into it. But it's about a man who's contemplating suicide. It begins with him like walking on the street or in a park, and he's kind of decided that he's had this gun for a long time and he's been contemplating it a lot, and and it starts with him like coming to the decision that he's going to do it. He's going to go home and kill himself, and sits down. He's at the dresser where the gun is, and he actually falls asleep before he does it, and then has this fantastic vision. And it was like one of the most psychedelic things I've ever read. Super interesting. I mean, it's only 20 pages. That's pretty much the whole premise. And then you read this vision. It was amazing. It really came out of nowhere. I wasn't thinking it was going to be about that at all, but great read. And then my other short story that I read that I suggest is The Body Snatchers by Robert Louis Stevenson. One of my all-time favorite settings is like 1860s Edinburgh, Scotland, and it's about these body snatchers. These people that dig up graves and sells the bodies to this anatomy professor. Kind of unravels from there, and then eventually they're like killing people to sell the bodies, and yeah, it just gets insane from there. And it's based off of a true story, so there's a lot of references to the actual people. Like the professor and someone else is like an actual real person, and then the two assistants are fictionalized, I think. I might be getting it wrong, but super interesting stuff. I absolutely loved it, and I'm definitely going to reread both those at some point in my life, if not soon. So yeah, getting into the actual top 10. Number 10 is, got it right here, number 10. I didn't make a video about this one because it's so popular, and I just kind of never got around to it, and it is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. The first Shirley Jackson book I've ever read, and I'm definitely going to read more of her. We Have Always Lived in a Castle, for sure going to read that one. I really liked the characters, I really liked the story, the plot, how everything unraveled. Each person was really fleshed out and felt real. My biggest complaint was there was a character that is introduced like around 3/4, 2/3 of the way through that really just killed the mood for me. She kind of felt like Professor Umbridge from Harry Potter, and just like, I don't know, I wish she wasn't even a thing. And if she hadn't have come in, it definitely would have been like a 5 out of 5, probably ranked higher on this list. But I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 just because that just kind of killed the whole mood for me. But the ending was really good. Definitely wasn't expecting what happened, and everything else was just the atmosphere and the characters and like the dialogue. Everything else was great. So definitely suggest if you hadn't heard of that, which most people have, I feel like, in the literature world. And then number 9, another book that most people have heard about, is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. Wasn't really expecting, like, I've tried reading Cormac McCarthy multiple times. I made a video about this that goes into more detail, but I really did end up enjoying it. It took me a little while to really click with this style. Yeah, once I did, it really satisfied that itch I had that I wanted for like a literary post-apocalyptic story that was super dark and dreary, and for some reason I was really in the mood for that, and that was the perfect book for it. Do plan on getting to more Cormac McCarthy. I really want to read No Country for Old Men this year. Number 8, which is the only, technically another nonfiction book, but it felt more literary to me. It felt more fiction to me, even though it wasn't. And that's John Steinbeck's Travels with Charlie. It's about him traveling the country in his truck with his dog named Charlie, and it was super fitting. It came at the perfect time. It was right when I was leaving. It was like the first month on the road. While I was traveling the country, living in my van. So it just kind of came at the perfect time. You know, I love Steinbeck's my favorite author. I just finished Cannery Row, which is like my 6th Steinbeck book. East of Eden and Grapes of Wrath are my 2 favorite books of all time. So yeah, he just had to be on this list. He always puts very unsuspected bits of wisdom that come out of nowhere. And you just talk about nothing, and all of a sudden he'll hit you with a line that just like resonates every time. And number 7 coming in is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. I really enjoyed this. People think this is really dark, and it wasn't as dark as I was expecting it to be. As myself that deals with, you know, depression and anxiety and like suicidal tendencies, helped me more, because the same thoughts and feelings that I've had to deal with, a lot of other people have dealt with it as well. And so people that haven't really dealt with those types of things, coming in and reading it is going into a rude awakening. But with someone like me who's like dealt with those types of things, I kind of felt better after reading it, just connecting with it and having those same types of thoughts. But yeah, you know, it's about this woman that's kind of doing everything that she wants to do. She has like a literary career in New York and doing well, and physically and career-wise, but mentally she's not. And yeah, it just goes deep into that. Most people have heard of The Bell Jar, so I won't go too much into it. And then coming in at number 6, another book everyone's heard of is Fahrenheit 451. Like most people, I had to read it in high school. Like most people around that time, I feel like no one really enjoys it. Doesn't really catch a lot of the layers, a lot of the references, because, you know, people haven't really like been accustomed to like a broad range of philosophy or like other literature. So It's just like a bunch of the references, you know, go over your head. It's about dystopian, futuristic book burning. Now that I've read more than I have, you know, in high school, obviously, and just kind of have more well-rounded knowledge, everything made a lot more sense, and it clicked with me a lot more, and really got me into some Ray Bradbury. I mean, it's a classic. Everyone's heard of it. If you didn't like it in high school and you're ever thinking about rereading it, definitely do. It makes a lot more sense, especially with everything going on right now with book banning in Texas, which is just absolutely absurd. It's a very important book. Check it out. All right, and down to number 5. Top 5 of 2021. Coming in at number 5 is Jack Kerouac's Dharma Bums, which I've read on the road. That was like one of the first books I like kind of read on my own in the literature world that kind of got me into it. I mean, you've seen some of my other videos and you know that the Beat generation kind of sparked my whole passion for literature, and so it was nice going back to him now that I've kind of read, you know, different countries and different time periods, and coming back to this, and definitely liked it more than On the Road. It's my favorite Jack Kerouac work now, and it was just great. You know, it's just him jumping trains, traveling all over California. I was reading it, you know, at the same time as I was in California and around San Francisco and Berkeley and that whole area, and yeah, it was awesome. You know, he has amazing prose. He lived an amazing, adventurous life. His views on women, you know, are definitely dated. There wasn't too much of that. I honestly didn't really know that much about Gary Snyder, and so it's mainly about his relationship with him. And even though the names are changed, it's pretty much nonfiction. I mean, I doubt any of it's that fake. I could see all of it being true, just the names changed. But yeah, it's about them, like, you know, living in nature, discussing Buddhist philosophy, hiking, traveling, jumping trains, hitchhiking, all that stuff. And, you know, that's like some of my favorite writings. I love that lifestyle. It was just great. Number 4 is Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. And yeah, this is my second Sally Rooney. She only has 3 books out. I've been kind of waiting to get her new one just because I want to savor it, wait a little more. I'll probably read it at the end of fall or winter of this year, just so give her more time so I don't have to wait really long for her next one. Normal People was like one of my top 10 favorite books of 2020. This is number 4 this year, and I still like Normal People a little more, but they're pretty equal in my eyes. I mean, great writing, great storytelling, and great characters, and I just really enjoyed it. Something about her just really clicks for me. Normal People on Hulu is kind of a thing that I've just rewatched every year. I just rewatched it for the 3rd time. It's probably be like a yearly thing. Every time I watch it, I find a new layer or something about it that I missed the first time. But it was her first book before Normal People, so it makes sense that it's not as good, but I mean, I think they're just as good. These 2 friends, Bobby and Francis, they're both like early 20s college students, and they're bisexual, and it's just kind of about their relationship with this couple who's married and are in their like early 30s and kind of higher up on the social ladder when it comes to the art scene and stuff like that. And Bobby, she's more into the wife, and Francis is more into the husband, and they start having an affair. And so it's just kind of like about the fluidity of like their relationships and stuff like that. And besides like the moral, ambiguous affair, I didn't really have anything problems with it, but the way she approaches it, there's some beauty in it. And yeah, I don't really like stuff that's like overtly sexual, and this was like the first book that had like quite a bit of sex in it that like I didn't mind at all, like the way she described it. And it's probably because, you know, a woman wrote it, but usually the sex scenes written by men are just atrocious. Looking at you, Murakami. It was great to read some sex scenes that were like beautifully written and weren't just like completely consumed by the male gaze. And coming in at number 3, we got Robert Louis Stevenson, who's now one of my favorite authors. I didn't really read any of his stuff until last year, and now I've read 3 or 4 of his things. But yeah, it was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Obviously, everyone's heard about this book, but it was very much different than I was expecting. It's mainstream culture, you know, things change, retellings. People kind of remember the retellings and the story of the stories more than the actual original story, so it was really interesting to read the original instead of what it's kind of turned into. But I absolutely enjoyed it. It was pretty much perfect. It was only 90 pages, I think, so it's like more of a novella, real short. And then NumberTwo, another big one that everyone's heard of. It's Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. First real big work from him that I've read. And yeah, it was great. Don't really need to go much more into it. It's, everyone kind of knows, it's a big philosophical book. Has to do with, you know, psychoanalysis, philosophy, paranoia, depression, descent of madness, everything that I kind of really like in a story. My only real complaint was that it was too long. There was some parts in it that I felt like were kind of unnecessary and could have been trimmed down, but I've grown to like Dostoevsky's writing a lot more now that I've read a couple of his short stories, and definitely going to be getting more into him. I got Poor Folk behind me that I'm going to be getting to fairly soon, probably in the middle of this year. So, you know, Crime and Punishment, it's one of the best books ever. It's NumberTwo, and coming in at #1, another book everyone's heard of, and it's probably the classic of classics, and absolutely blew me out of the water. 10 out of 10, 5 out of 5, no problems with it. Definitely going to reread, and that is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. I'm officially a huge Charles Dickens fan. I had to read Bleak House and Mystery of Edwin Drood in college, and they were okay to me. They weren't my favorite. I'm not really big about like the judicial court type of stories. This one was absolutely great, about Pip and coming up, his expectations changing from when he's a little boy taken in by his aunt and his uncle, and then growing up to be a gentleman. And what that means follows him from probably when he's like 5 or 10 until he's like in his mid-20s, maybe 30s. Yeah, you know, it's about love and loss and death and family and expectations, obviously, and how those change throughout your life. And yeah, it was just, you know, amazing. It's one of those books that I feel like it's better if you go into blind. Yeah, I made a video about it as well, so you can check that out. This is my top 10 books of 2021. Good reading year. I only read 37 out of 52 books that I wanted to this year. Still a good reading year. Some of them were bigger than I'm used to tackling, like Crime and Punishment and Great Expectations, and I read Kafka on the Shore, which I was pretty disappointed by, but I'm trying to get a head start on this year. I've already finished 4 books, coming up on 5. Trying to bust out a bunch of like shorter works so I can read some longer ones, because I got House of Leaves and what's it called? The Labyrinth of Spirits, which is my last Zafon, and Cemetery of Forgotten Books. There's 4 of them, and this is my last one. Both of those are pretty long, 600 to 800 pages, so I'm trying to bust out a lot of shorter works so I can get to those. And yeah, thanks for sticking with me, and peace.